Hi everyone, my name is James Feeney. Welcome to or back to my channel. February has come and gone, which means that I have a month of favorites and reflections to share. Now that it is March, thankfully, getting a little bit warmer. Without further ado, I'll jump in. I usually start with the card decks I worked with the most and speak to those. Then I move into the books that I read, so that's a bit of a series of mini reviews. And then I speak to miscellaneous items, culminating in the experiences, the primary experiences that I have that are noteworthy from the past month. So if you're looking to skip around, that's the general order I go in. I'll start with the more obvious tarot and card deck favorites that have been here for quite some time and aren't really going anywhere, the first being the Thoth. I always have the trimmed version on hand for readings for myself and clients. It's a mainstay, one I can always chuck in my bag, and it's perfect. So there's that. And then the other one that I've mentioned quite a bit recently is the Pagan Playing Cards by Usi. Really, it's just about having some sort of playing card deck on hand at all times, and this one happens to be really beautiful and high quality and pretty standard, so it does the trick. And that's the one that I tend to reach for. I've been housing it in this sort of leather case I got on Etsy. Those tuck boxes wear away so quickly, and I'm somebody who likes to chuck my decks in a bag, especially the ones that I like working with, so protective casing for my favorite decks is usually pretty important to me, otherwise they would get pretty messed up very quickly. So the other decks that I have to mention, I guess, are a little bit more exciting. They are all of the Marseille variety. I've mentioned that in recent months I've been studying the Marseille more alongside my playing card studies, and so I did make some investments in decks that are highly regarded and spoken of and referenced quite a bit in a lot of the books I'm starting to read. So I have a few to mention. The first, which I already had but just really took off the shelf for purposes of study, is the CBD Tarot, the let me find his name. The Conver Bendov deck. So this one is based on the Conver, as the name alludes to, and I was mostly using this when reading Yoav Bendov's book this past month, or rereading it, I should say, and we'll get into that in just a bit. It's a wonderful deck. This mass market version is produced by US Games, so the card stock is on the thicker side, pretty high quality. It's more of like a standard tarot size, which is nice. It's a little bit taller and then a little bit thinner, but it's beautiful. I think it was done really well. That's the first one. The second one is Alejandro Jodorowsky's deck. Comes in this box. I didn't have the CBD box on hand, but this is this deck's box. And I mostly got this to use and study alongside Jodorowsky's book on the Marseille, which is quite extensive, and a recommendation from Anna at Astral Lady Tarot, so thank you for that. This deck is quite vibrant and colorful as far as Marseilles go, and I know he's taken some creative liberties, added some flourishes and changes, which he mentions in his book, so I'm excited to delve into that more. I actually like the thinner cardstock on this deck quite a bit more than some thicker cardstocks. It's really easy to shuffle, the size is really manageable, and the colors are definitely something that is fun and interesting and exciting depending on the day and what I'm looking for. But this one has been another one I've really enjoyed. These are the backs. I believe you have to now get these from his website, or a website, Tarot, it might be Tarot Boutique or something like that. I forget. You have to sort of fill out an order form to get them. It's not the simplest, most seamless buying process, but it was worth it and it arrived pretty quickly. So there's that one for study as well. And then two others that are also for study but also for personal use and pleasure are the Noble Tarot, the Jean-Claude Fleunois. I'm not going to be able to say a lot of these French words as I speak to my Marseille experience, so apologies for the pronunciations, but the Fleunois deck, the Noble, so this one is referenced heavily in, I believe, Fleunois' book, which I haven't started yet, but I have right here. So I thought it would be good, and of course, for purposes of reference and all of that good stuff. And I have another book on the way that speaks more so to the Noble, so I wanted to have it. It has the sharp traditional edges. I'm sure many Marseille users are very familiar with these decks already. Has the sharp edges. These are the backs. It's quite small. I'm thinking I'm going to trim not trim it, but I'm going to round the corners, which may sound blasphemous. I hope nobody out there is upset by that, but I really like to use my decks heavily, and sharp corners to me sort of make a deck a little bit less usable. They are more delicate and they make it harder to shuffle, and they tend to get dinged up really quickly, and so I would just prefer to round the corners. I'll probably use like the smallest setting, so it's only slightly rounded, but that to me makes it more accessible as far as shuffling and reading and portability goes, that I can bring it around and not be too worried about it getting scuffed up and dinged up around the edges. So there's that. I actually find this deck to be really beautiful. I know it's one of the older ones, and I kind of like the simplicity in the art a lot. So this would definitely be actually a favorite, and the size is really cute and small, more traditional in terms of like smaller cards in history. So there's that. And then finally, another purchase from Flanois is the Dodal. So this is, do I have the box on hand? Yes. So this one, which you also get from his website or from their website, him and his wife's, I believe he's passed away unfortunately, but his wife Roxanne handles the orders. So it's this deck, and this was also from their website. And you have to do a similar process with an order form and just receive like a PayPal link and then pay it that way. It is a larger size than I expected. I'd seen people talk about it and didn't really expect it to be as big as it is. It doesn't bother me. I can still riffle shuffle it pretty well, and it's not, I have decently large hands to be able to do that, thankfully, but it is bigger than I expected, which is interesting. But I love the artwork. I definitely see the appeal that people speak of in terms of the expressions and the sort of charming nature of the characters and the eyes and the faces. So I can definitely see that, and I've been enjoying using this one as well. I would say this one and the Noble are a little bit more like personal use decks, and I can imagine chucking the Hodorovsky and the CBD in a bag really just quickly to go and read at like a shop or something like that. So there's that. That takes us through, I think, all of the decks of the month. Not super exciting, especially if you're not into Marseille, and I know a lot of the imagery is pretty similar throughout the deck, so I didn't want to spend too much time harping on any of that. But those are the decks that I've been using, reading with, researching, and using in my studies. And I think that perfectly segues us into the book category for the month. And I'm dropping everything over here. So I'll go in the order that I read them in, I think. What came first? Okay, so first I reread, actually, the Marseille Tarot Revealed, A Complete Guide to Symbolism, Meanings, and Methods by Yoav Ben-Dov. This uses the illustrations from the CBD Tarot, which is why I wanted to have that on hand when reading this. This, I think, was maybe my first Marseille book, which was like almost 2 years ago, I think, that I read it, and I couldn't remember much of it, and so I decided to start here and reread it. It's a beautiful book with full color images. It speaks to how to read, a bit on the history, the symbolism, as the title alludes to, speaking to the symbolism, but I think it's really comprehensive. It's not super, super long, but it's also not a short, quick read. I really enjoyed it. It speaks to more of the intricacies of reading with Marseille and some traditional sort of precedents that's been set when using the deck, which I appreciated as somebody who is newer to that system. Of course, if you're a tarot reader, just changing the system like to Marseille or Thoth or Rider-Waite-Smith, you can of course read with those decks, but I do care to know how it was intended, and it's a bit on its history and the way it's used by others. So this was a book that helped me with that. I then read a novel, The Starlight Sea, by Erin Morgenstern, and she also writes or has written The Night Circus, which I'm reading now. So spoiler alert, I love this book so much that I went out and got The Night Circus, The Night Circus right away, and I'm already reading that and heavily invested. So The Starlight Sea is more of a fantasy style novel. It really, I don't want to give anything away, but if you are into spirituality and tarot and stuff, which I'm guessing you are if you're watching this, there are references to tarot and fortune telling and really cool things like that. The protagonist's mother is regarded as a fortune teller who owns a metaphysical shop, and she sometimes uses tarot. There's a scene in the book where tarot is used and thought of in terms of storytelling, which automatically appealed to me. I love thinking of the cards as pages in a book, or a way of telling stories, or sort of like a sacred tome that can sort of iterate or reiterate any sort of story. So that was fun. And I would say the basic premise of this novel is that it's a novel about stories, or a story about stories with many stories in it. So the structuring is quite funny. You follow mostly the protagonist, but in between each chapter and section, you get a short story from books that they're actually holding on to in the novel. So they're reading this book, and then you're slowly reading the short stories from the books that they have in their possession. And then it is fantastical. There's this other sort of world where there's this massive library and a sea under the ground, and it's really wonderful. I think if you're into sort of the Magician series by Liv Grossman, which are one of my favorites, and Harry Potter and all those sorts of things, this would definitely be a great sort of adult fantasy genre type novel that fits well into those sorts of categories. So I'd highly recommend it. There's a bit of romance at play. It really gives you the whole gambit of things. It has that really thin sort of paper to it. So at first I didn't think it was going to be a long book, but this paper reminds me of like a Bible. Bibles always have thin paper, but it's a little over, it's close, like 550 pages, but I wouldn't say it takes terribly long to read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. One of maybe the best novels I've read in a few years. So highly recommend for anybody interested in this type of book. And then I read Terrorology by Enrique Enriquez. And I already had this one in my possession as well and had skimmed it, but I pulled it off the shelf in regards to Marseille's study. I watched his documentary Terrorology on Amazon twice this month, and so I figured I really needed to read the book. And so I did, and this one it's quite poetic and experimental. The writing style, I wouldn't quite call it prose or anything similar to that. There are definitely very coherent moments where he is speaking to you as a reader, but there's plenty where it's all just this jarble that you kind of have to interpret for yourself, and I think that's the point. The idea of readers like Enrique Enriquez and Camelia, I believe it's Camelia Elias, those sorts of readers who really like to deconstruct and break down the idea of just reading the images and the words and the experience of the cards. So a lot of what this book, I think at its heart, is pushing you to do is to leave any sort of preconceived notions behind, to think for yourself, to actually get you thinking critically and creatively when it comes to the cards. And so it really does accomplish that. So you do have to focus and pay attention, and you can't be like a lazy reader when reading this. And I think that's something that Enrique Enriquez speaks to, is the idea that for those who don't care to read, or who don't care to try to understand the cards, he's not for them. Or he says that in his documentary, that he's not there for people who don't care to read or understand. So this is one that you actually have to take the time to invest a little bit in, and there were plenty of passages I read multiple times just to feel like I was getting everything out of them, but it was a very worthwhile experience. It sort of shifted the way I was thinking about the cards, which I value immensely, and it's not a terribly long one as well, but it is one I think you would behoove yourself to take your time with and not try to rush through. So highly recommend this one as well, along with his documentary if you haven't seen it. Although I know, for example, that the documentary is not available in all countries. I was speaking to some of my tarot friends and we were talking about it, and I know it wasn't available on Amazon or in a way to watch in their country. So if it's not, I'm not really sure what the alternative would be. So I will hopefully try to look into that, and if I come up with an answer, I will let everybody know or put it in the description. But this book was really great. And then the final book that I read was the Kabalistic Tarot, a textbook of mystical philosophy by Robert Wang. And as more of like a sort of quirky comparison, I guess, I decided to read these two very oppositional books alongside each other. So I was reading them both at the same time, and I don't think Enrique Enriquez gets on very well with what the subject matter of this book would be. Likewise, I'm not sure that Robert Wang would get on so well with the way that Enrique Enriquez reads the cards and thinks of them. So I'm definitely somebody who likes the shades of gray in terms of tarot reading and how I go about it, and so I value both. I just made a video on tarot correspondences and symbolisms, bullshit and brilliant, or brilliant and bullshit, and I definitely think that there's something to be said for either sides of the spectrum, so it was fun to read them simultaneously or at the same time. Now, this one does read a bit like a textbook, so it can get boring. I did make the concerted effort to read it front to back, although maybe that's not the best way to go about it. It's a little bit of a dry read in the way that you would imagine a textbook can be, but it offers a lot of information. I wouldn't say this is like the go-to for the Thoth at all, or anything like that. It doesn't really teach you how to read the cards, but it speaks to these deeper concepts in, I would say, a more esoteric occult fashion. It does sort of take into account that you know some things about the Golden Dawn, or at least a little bit about the Kabbalah. I think if I didn't know anything and picked up this book, I would get quite lost. And even as somebody who knows a decent amount on this subject matter, there were times when I felt a bit lost. Although Robert Wang does speak to the fact that you may feel a little bit confused, and that's perfectly fine. So I did appreciate that. And it does go through all of the cards in terms of the paths and the Sephiroth on the Tree of Life. So, and then you get the visual depictions of all of, like, I would say the major modern systems. So you get a Marseille picture, Rider-Waite-Smith, Thoth, and then I think it's the Golden Dawn Tarot. So sometimes he'll speak to the symbolism throughout those decks and compare them, which I loved. But there is sort of a bias. I think that the Marseille was almost never brought up, and it was kind of frowned upon when it was, or seen as simplistic. And I would say the Thoth was more glorified. The Rider-Waite-Smith got some critical remarks. And then it seems like the Golden Dawn Tarot, which I think Robert Wang had some involvement with, I think he may have been the creator, that one was kind of put on a pedestal. So there was some subjectivity going on in regards to systems and decks, but all the same, I did appreciate it and found it really valuable. So if anybody out there is into the Kabbalah and a Thoth nerd like I am and all those sorts of things, this would be one to read. So that takes us through all of the books, all of the decks to the best of my knowledge, and now I'll get into more miscellaneous type items and things. So I will start with my daily journal, which I actually finished this month. I believe I finished it this month. February felt like a long one for whatever reason, but I did finish this, and that felt really fulfilling. I like to get through my daily practice journals. I have other journals for other things, but I always have one that's strictly for my daily card draws, and sometimes a few of my musings or just things I want to jot down or scribble out or doodle. And so it feels really nice to have finished another one. And so the way that I went about starting up my new daily journaling practice is to actually use this sketchbook sort of notebook I had on hand instead of going out and buying a new notebook for the purposes of daily journaling. This one had a few pages in the beginning that I'd doodled on, but I started to decide that I wanted to make it my sort of daily practice journal. So I do my card draws, and then I will actually sketch out a picture or something that I feel applies to it, something that's usually a little bit more abstract or metaphorical in regards to the cards. And then I will write something that's a little bit more poetic or reflective all around in between what I drew. And so that's really interesting. I would share it. Maybe I will share some of them, but I haven't prepared ones that feel all right to share. I'm not sure which ones would be personal and which ones wouldn't. So I won't really get into that too much, but I've enjoyed it. The paper of like a sketchbook is really cool. And I've been using this brush tip marker instead of more of like a ballpoint pen. And the brush tip, I think, lends itself well to creating images. And I've also been kind of trying to sketch out certain tarot cards that I get each day to some degree to improve my, one, artistic skills, and two, to get a better relationship with the cards, with the Marseille and playing cards, just to add to my studies. But this has been really fun. I do like to spice up my daily practice, so switching it up from a dot journal, which feels really structured, to something that has no lines at all, where I'm almost painting with this brush pen, is really fun for me to add some life into it so I don't get stagnant and bored and fall off the wagon. I do have videos on my journals and daily spiritual practice where I speak to things like this, so I'll try to remember to link those around. But this has definitely been a favorite, and it's nice to kind of close that chapter to an end with the former tarot journal, daily practice journal. And so after that, what else do we have to share? Mostly just these two things. They're more so things that I use to enhance and create my sacred space. You may know I'm not big on incense and herb bundles that I burn. I'm very sensitive to the smoke, so I use sound cleansing and sound for a lot of things, but I also am usually pretty alright with mists. So I've mentioned this one before. This is more of like a moon, Florida water type mist. It's really earthy and has some sweet tones to it, and so I'll use it as like a body mist too. It's wonderful. And then my aunt dropped this one off. It's an aromatherapy sort of blend called Hot Spring Spa. And I've loved just spraying this in my room. It really creates this very clean and relaxing atmosphere. So I do love me a good mist with some essential oils in it. So there's that. And I think that takes me through most of the miscellaneous items. So I'll start to speak to the experiences from this month. And this month has been really fun and wonderful for me. I finished up the winter sessions with my tarot class that I'm teaching, so that was great. And now I have some time to do and work on other workshops I want to do before hopefully getting a spring session all put together, which is something I'm looking forward to. So that's been really great. I've had wonderful experiences with clients online this month, which was awesome. A little bit of an uptick there, which makes me feel hopeful and just good. I was able to do a Zoom event for the first time, and that was really interesting to be able to read the cards at an event, but online, and I enjoyed that, and it was wonderful. I'm trying to think what else experience-wise. I started reading at another shop, which I also really am happy about, so now I read at 2 shops, and so it's nice to kind of have this where I'm spread out a little bit. So I've been really valuing that and the way that I'm able to branch out during these times, because I know it's not easy for a lot of people, including myself, but to just see some sort of uptick in business in my local market is promising. And I know that there are plenty of small businesses that are kind of just trying to get by, and so it's been nice to see that there's been a little bit of an uptick there. And what else? Oh, I wanted to mention, I thought this was just funny, and I talked to a few of my friends about this, but that I guess I'd been seeing a little bit more like hate comment or trolls in my comment sections recently, and to me it's mostly funny, but I didn't really expect it, or I'd never experienced that before, and they've been just, I mostly laugh at them, but I can imagine that like if I didn't feel as secure where I am or with who I am, that they could be really damaging. And it is unfortunate, and I'm really glad that I can just laugh it off. But there are some really rude people out there that I'm just like, why would you comment if that's what you have to say? And I remember Katie Flowers speaking to it in one of her videos a while back, how some trolls will comment something particularly rude directed at you and then delete it, so that way you can't delete the comment and no one else can see it except you, but it still remains in your notifications. So I've had that happen a few times, and then a few were bold enough to actually comment and not delete it, and I did respond to those, or one of them, and that was pretty funny. I got things, one spoke to me being ugly and said that my fake eyelashes were shit, and they used a homophobic slur. It was crazy. And by the way, my eyelashes are real, and I don't care if you think that I'm ugly, but yeah, just very interesting things. One was telling me I had the personality of a door, and said some other crude things that were actually really creative, so props to them for that. I did respond to one that basically told me I would lose all my friends, among other things, and yeah, I just didn't want them to get the better of me, so I responded something nice. But it's been a funny experience, in my opinion, to look at these things, and I find them personally kind of funny, but I don't like that there are people out there that do that, and I really hope that others aren't experiencing that as much. Although, based on my conversations with others, this does happen to quite a few people. So I guess that's an experience worth noting, one that I found to be funny. Yeah, just fun times. But I think that about wraps things up. I hope you are all doing well. Let me know what your February was like, what decks and books and items and experiences you've had that were really memorable and stuck with you. And I hope you are all well. Like and subscribe if this was fun or interesting. And until next time, bye.